Today I'm joined by Mark Knowlton, founder of TechScreen, who's on a mission to revolutionize a $750 billion industry of recruiting. And he may have actually done it. Mark Knowlton has spent decades in tech recruiting, and he's seen firsthand how the combination of keyword based systems and resume based decisions in hiring just waste billions of dollars in the whole recruiting and hiring process and leave top level talent still unseen because it's impossible to really know how good someone is. In this episode, we're diving deep into how the combination of AI screening and analytics completely flips the model on its head by reducing empty seats, uncovering all of your hidden top talent, and turning recruiting into a true data driven, competency based system, which up until now hasn't really existed. So, this is a pretty exciting one, and let's get into it. Well, Mark, it's great to have you on today. I'm super excited about our conversation. And to kick things off, you've been in tech recruiting for a really long time, I think
Yes.
decades. So, what was the I can't take it anymore moment that made you start TechScreen?
Well, it was more of an epiphany of taking what I had done individually and scale it. So let me take a step back. So because the term technical recruiter is actually one of the biggest professional misnomers in existence, because recruiters aren't technical. They're just not. And any recruiter who says that they're technical is completely full of it. Like, I don't even call myself technical because I've never written code in my life. However, there's probably a triple digit number of people who I've hired over the years who would have bet money I was a developer. In fact, that I'll share something with you later, that one of the things that got me to start TechScreen was, in fact, a comment I saw in Glassdoor. but anyways, I got into recruiting in '96 at a staffing firm. And, I was a journalism major, who was allergic to math, and got into an IT recruiting shop and found out that I was pretty good at it because the bullpen seemed kind of like the newsroom. There was just a lot of buzz of activity, a lot of people on the phone, a lot of high energy. But I wound up getting recruited from a staffing firm into a high-end Microsoft solution provider where I was hiring talent for the company. And I bring a guy in for the C++ development role, and I was horrified when I see this guy getting escorted to the elevator after like 3 minutes. And so we're in this old big mill building. It was just big. I run down to the CEO's office. I said, Frank, what happened? Did he take a swing at you? Did he make a crass comment about your wife's picture on your desk? Like, what happened? And he looked at me, he paused, and he said, dude, if I interview one more person like that, I'm going to shoot you in the head. And so he obviously was making a joke of it, but there was just enough seriousness in his tone that said, okay, I need to figure out some way to do my own technical due diligence. And so after that, I started sitting in the room. Now, we had two middle tier developer guys who were just stone killers. And I'd sit in the room while they were, flaying these poor guys alive. But I'd write down the questions. And then afterwards, I'd debrief with them. I said, okay, Dennis, Weston, what are the answers to these questions? And what does it tell us about their knowledge? Meaning, if they don't know this, that means they can't build this, right? And just constantly did it. And I made a nuisance of myself. I would ask guys all the time to explain things, get them to whiteboard stuff out for me. I read the white paper on C#. I read the white paper on Java. And I'm sitting in my office one day, and I'm talking to a guy with a real resume. He worked, if you from our area in Greater Boston, you would recognize names of the companies. And they asked him to a pretty right down the middle of the road question on object orientation, which is a software engineering principle. And I asked him to define polymorphism. And the guy's answer was so wildly off target, I almost fell out of my chair. But the thing that really blew me away was not the comic inaccuracy of his answer, it was the confidence with which he said it. And I was like, oh my God, I just DQ'd this guy on technical merit. And wow. So then I really just, then I started, like going to Microsoft Code Camp, which were these, weekends, sessions where guys would make 90-minute presentations that would make you have a migraine. And a lot of my friends were engineers, and I still to this day have saved like long IM sessions going back and forth with friends of mine who are world-class engineers. And I just, over time, I picked up this ability to do my own technical screening. In fact, one time, and this was one of the things that really was an eye opener for me. I was working for an agency. This was 2006, and we were working with a major telco company, and the manager had super high bar, and said, that my team has got such a high bar, we knock out like 95% of the people. And so I of course we post the job, and I got a candidate apply for the job, and hadn't coded in 4 years. His last coding job was 2002. And I looked at the resume. I said, "Oh, I know what happened to this guy. He's one of these dudes who just kind of gravitated toward these wonky hardware-centric shops, missed the web completely. Then post.com meltdown. He gets kicked out, and he's just hanging on to any technical job he could get. I think he was doing production support." And and they said, "Wait a second." I said, "I sound like one of our customers." So this guy took the time to read my post, our job posting, and he applied. Like, I'm going to call this guy up. And I was ruthless with him. I grilled him on C++, but he did great. And so I sent the an email that described, if you indulge me, I could actually, if I actually have the content of the email I sent. So this was the actual content I sent to the manager. Didn't say C++ knowledge would be rusty, but I was wrong. So then this is what we talked about. Started with some softballs and memory allocation. Handle them out without blinking. Then we dug a little deeper. Function overload and overriding. Nailed them as well. Then we got into memory management, something that the manager said was a big deal. And I gave an example of a very advanced question I asked on why you need to write your own copy constructor and assignment operator, and he nailed it cold, and I was able to finish with, "I'm convinced this guy is worth your time." And so the result is the manager gave him a phone screen. They were brutal with them, but they invited him in, brought him in for 5 hours and beat him up some more. Then they hired him. It generated a $22,000 fee on a candidate no recruiter in their right mind would have called in 100 years. So what that told me was, even a manager with this super high bar would respond to evidence that overcame whatever assumptions they might have made about the candidate's capabilities based on the resume. The resume is such a wildly misleading document because it has no context. And managers, because they're accustomed to reading them so quickly, because there's too many resumes to read, they just have to come up with their own methodology, and so they treat resumes like a blackjack dealer flipping cards. And so one of the reasons why I want to start TechScreen was because I saw the impact you could have in helping companies hire the right people, because you actually can harvest their knowledge required for a given job by asking the right questions. Is that, because there are probably not many recruiters who are as mule stubborn and stupid as me to take 20 years of my life to just self-educate at the eyedropper full, to turn myself into like a pseudo technical person. So we rolled out TechScreen organically. The partner and he wrote the code, I designed the system, where we had libraries, because I was already starting with libraries of technical questions I've been asking for years. They were benchmarked in battle, right? I consulted major software companies, the MathWorks, Akamai, Pegasystems, and so I knew these questions were legit. And so it provided the question and the answer right on the screen. The UI was like the script for the recruiter. So they would know what question to ask, they would know what to expect, but they would have to be the ones to give credit or withhold credit for the candidate's answers. And we have an algorithm that scores the interview based on 100, how much do they know and how well do they explain themselves. And so over a year ago, we deployed our 5.0 version of the product with AI Verify. So now we can do an entire interview, and the candidate's answers to the questions are graded with our AI. And so we can present the candidate's competencies based on how they responded to questions. And so we're super excited because finally, now there are other tools out there that can transcribe the conversation you're having, but then the manager would have to read the candidate's comments, et cetera, to extract whether they really think the person's going to be worth their time. um, but ours really digs into the detail of analyzing the accuracy of the candidate's answers against our database. As we're not using like ChatGPT to go find an answer to this microservice design question. It's in our curated database that we have 100% control over, that is concrete truth about the subjects. And so we're able to provide a dev manager level screen at the top of the funnel for any recruiter. And so we're just super excited on being able to automate. We're working on a version right now. Now picture this: candidates apply for a job that's posted somewhere out there. With the version we're working on right now, when you post, so let's say it's a Friday afternoon and some recruiting coordinator is posting a, I don't know, front end Java job. Our system is going to, that will be integrated with the various ATSs. It's going to take the job description, and it's going to generate an interview based on the deliverables of the position. All right. Then candidate applies for the job over the weekend, and they're going to get a pop-up, and it's going to say, hey, the hiring manager created a short quiz for this position. Would you be willing to take it? Now, so they'll have the option to take it or not. Now, maybe it's because I'm kind of an optimist, but my assumption is that most candidates are going to have the common sense to say, if I thumb my nose at this manager and choose to not take the quiz, they're probably not getting pushed to the front of the line. Maybe they're not blackballed, but they're definitely not going to do themselves any favors. So our assumption is that most candidates would agree to play ball. So they're just going to be presented with a question. They're not going to be any cartoon avatars that are, probably going to offend most, deep techie guys. And they'll just have a verbal interaction, answering the questions that are presented to them visually. And without going down a rabbit hole, there's going to be, tons and tons of countermeasures to prevent cheating. So there's all kinds of ways people will try to cheat. We're gonna cover them all. We don't need to bore anyone with those details. But what'll happen is the candidate will now, when their application for the job is completed with their completion of the interview, then bang, their VAR analysis report is going to be in the ATS. So right now, typically with an ATS, they'll rank the candidates who apply for the job, and usually you'll see some rating based on 100, but that value typically is the percentage of keywords that are a match between the resume and the job description. With our case, the VAR analysis, that stack ranking will be by high score. So imagine you're the recruiter for this front end Java job. You come in on a Monday morning and you see that 503 candidates applied for the job, and all but 7 of them took the interview. Now, in the old world, you would have to decide which candidates you're going to contact, but you're going to have to go through them one by one and call them, email them. see which, after you've looked at their resume to see which ones are good. So this is a very time consuming task. With our solution, you're just going to say, wow, 502 submittals. I think I'm going to focus on the 11 candidates who scored 90 or better on the interview we deployed. So recruiters are only going to contact qualified candidates. So we're working on a new version of the product that's going to have AI automation screen every candidate at scale. And so this is going to revolutionize the way companies hire people, because most of the candidates who apply for jobs don't get contacted. It's not because they're terrible, right? It's because of human capacity and the constraint of time.
Yeah.
And the truth is, when a recruiter gets assigned a role, typically, a recruiter is going to carry anywhere from 10 to 15 recs all in, right? And let's use that front end Java position. Now, let's say you're the recruiter, and among the first 50, or let's say the first 50 candidates, you find 10 candidates who are just no brainers for you to call. You call all 10 of them. 6 of those candidates are no brainers for you to send to the manager. So now you have 6 new candidates you sent to that manager. Now, there are other candidates, who've applied for that position. So there, let's say among the first 50, because you found 6 people worth submitting, let's say there were that 50 candidates was one of like 250 who have applied. So candidates 51 through 250 didn't see the light of day, and his candidates going to continue to apply for the job. But you're worried about 3 other positions who have maybe less attractive job descriptions, older technology, they're not getting as much action, and those managers are yelling at you or yelling at your boss because they're not seeing any people. Well, the candidates who had the misfortune of having applied 51st or later, they're not seeing the light of day, and they didn't do anything wrong. You didn't do anything wrong because you covered that job with 6 really good people, and now you're focused on other things. That happens all the time. The way ATSs were built, and I actually wrote about this in my newsletter, Taking the Mystery Out of High Tech, is that the way ATSs are structured, you almost guaranteed to ghost a high percentage of your population in there. It's just the truth. And so we're going to revolutionize the way companies manage talent inside their own ATSs, because everyone's going to show up at the top of the funnel fully screened against a set of requirements based on the job posting itself.
Yeah. That's incredible. It's such a big industry that hasn't had any solution, for getting the middleman out and
Well,
getting all
think
that
about it this
time
way.
out.
U.S. companies spend $10 billion a year on sourcing tools like LinkedIn Recruiter and Seek Out. They spend $35 billion a year on job advertising, which includes all the job postings. In fact, I happen to see there's a popular podcast in our industry, Chad and Cheese. Chad Solosh and Joel Cheeseman, and they had on the person who runs talent for Marriott, and Chad, not being a jerk about it, but he was kind of making light of the fact that this VP, Megan, who runs talent at Marriott, was going to be spending money on posts that will undoubtedly attract people who are already in her ATS, because of the massive inefficiency in the ATS platforms and the processes by which companies harvest talent in their own databases, and human, you know, uh, limitations and time limitations. They can't possibly touch all the candidates in the database. But with our AI correlate solution, they get to start with all of the candidates, or a high percentage of them, having already been technically qualified for their job. So they're not going to have people slipping through the cracks, because if, let's say in your scenario, you were working at a company that was using AI correlate, you're not going to just go with the first 50 candidates. You're going to go stack rank that whole pile by high score. And you can pick the dozen people who got 90 or better.
Yeah.
And for the people who got a 68, well, better luck next time. Sharpen up your skills, do a better job on an interview, apply for another position and get screened for that one. But at least you're cherry picking people who are the most worthy, and you're not missing anybody. You're looking at the people. Oh, this guy got a 52. Probably not going to pass muster with the manager either. But at least you're making a data driven decision to contact or not contact somebody based on what evidence you have.
Yeah. And you're also now harnessing all that data you have to use on other positions that, like you mentioned, might not have been as attractive for people, but now you have all the data to say, oh, this is a perfect match for this position. We know they're looking for a job. Might as well kill two birds with one stone.
But and think about this. Think of what this is going to mean for internal mobility,
Mm,
right? Somebody who is one business unit over here, and let's say, let's say a company has different technical environments. Maybe one, they're building the commercial product that drives all the revenue, and that's written in C++ and Linux and networking protocols. But there's some internal groups who are all doing Java web stuff, because it's some, like, we got a customer portal where they have massive amount of ability to do all this cool self-service stuff. Completely different animals, right? Now let's say the person on the product side is getting kind of tired of their job. They've been doing it for 6.5 years, and they say, let me go take a shot at some of this Java web stuff. And they simply apply for a job that's going to feed them an interview that's based on the spec. Boom, they crush it. And you say, holy cow, we never would have thought Jeff, the metal guy, the headbanger, who's, knows network protocols like no one's business, and a C++ Linux guy, who the hell knew he could do Java web stuff? But thank God, look at this. And what'll happen is it will be creating dynamic competency profiles for every single person in the ATS. Companies are going to be managing their own talent base that's documented their competencies. This is going to change everything about how companies harvest and manage and develop talent internally. So this is, it is cool as it is to screen people at the top of the funnel. This is going to be an end-to-end competency ecosystem where companies are going to be to harvest and nurture their own talent pools inside their own ATS. Their dependence on job postings and sourcing tools is going to fall off a cliff.
I'm even like thinking now, if you have a employee who you want to promote to a new position, but you're not sure about their level of competency or what gaps they have to fill,
Yeah, and
you
what
can
and what
now,
and let me interject right here. So you're speaking on behalf of some manager who's got this position, and you're making this assumption based on what? Your impression of this person's capabilities based on their
yeah.
static document, their resume.
Or they've been working for you and maybe like, oh, they've shown some promise in this area, but I don't know what gaps of knowledge they have in
Right.
order for them to be able to execute well in this position. How do I uncover exactly what I need to train them on, or what areas they need to improve?
Exactly right. Exactly right. What a great point. It's also going to be huge for L&D, right? So let's say you got somebody who's got all the right skills, and maybe it's a client-facing position, and you see a clear deficiency. So maybe they're really good with, let's say, like React or Angular on a front end basis, but they really don't understand something like microservices. The ability to design highly compartmentalized functionality, using sort of object-oriented principles, but they just go to school on understanding microservice design, etc. But now they're able to build customized solutions for the client, because not only do they have all the front end skills that they always had, React, Angular, CSS, what have you, but they were able to beef up their competencies in microservices design. Now they're an absolute killer, and they were able to grow their own talent. They just were able to measure they're super strong over here, they're a little deficient over here on microservices, but let's just get them up with their microservices knowledge so we can just unleash them on our customers. And yeah, there's no end to how companies can manage and develop talent internally, just because we are now going to bring a way to measure technical competence that's based upon the deliverables of individual jobs.
Yeah. And what's particularly interesting to me now that I'm thinking about it is how, as a candidate for an entry level position, let's say, one thing that's important to you, or in this case to me as an entry level candidate, is where's my room to grow? Do they
Mm-hmm.
have a system in place for recognizing talent and moving them up? And how are they measuring the readiness of the candidates to move up? And if I know they have a system that scores me and I can test maybe myself to see my readiness for a position, it's almost like more intrinsically motivating to continue developing professionally because you have a benchmark for yourself.
Absolutely. And for the people who are probably really introverted, they don't have a personal relationship with that manager over here because they're in a different building.
Exactly.
I don't get over there and just kind of keep to myself. But then the people who are more politicians, so to speak, and outgoing, they reach out to that manager. You know, they already know somebody who works on that manager's team, and they could finesse their way into being regarded. Oh, this would be a great person to come over. What if there's someone who's an even better fit, but they just didn't have the wherewithal to go do the politics of that? But now they could just apply for a job. Well, how about this? How about this use case? If you wanted to test your mettle against a different set of skills, but not necessarily formally apply for the job,
Yeah,
just for internal people, just check a box in there.
exactly.
Yeah, this is just for evaluation purposes, just for personal development. You know, um,
Exactly. That's what I was saying. Like, if I'm an entry level candidate and I want to see what would it take for me to move up, I can
yep.
test myself and see exactly what areas I'm maybe lacking in or I could improve more in without necessarily a formal evaluation. It's just like, yeah, it's like a practice test for an
Yep.
exam, except in this case,
Exactly.
professional
And
development.
every time someone does interviews or does the interview that's bolted to a particular position, that's going to be just added to your dynamic competency profile. It's just
Yeah.
going to become more
hmm
rich in
Because
context.
it can be difficult to prove your contribution or your level of understanding over time and when you're working in the day to day because you're taking on projects and it's hard to like when it comes down to a formal conversation, okay, well, why are you good for this promotion? It's not going to be top of mind, yet you've definitely built up that experience, and now if you have the profile that proves here's all of the things I've done,
Exactly.
it takes a lot
And
of the
then the
stress out.
managers themselves, they don't have unlimited time just to be able to
Yeah,
go have a sidebar conversation with, an employee who works in a different business unit. It's not because they don't want to give them a shot. It's because there's only 168 hours in a week. Last time I checked,
100%.
you know, and so this is just going to add un, unimagined levels of efficiency and documentation and scale in how companies are able to organize, manage, and curate their own competencies of all their people.
Yeah, I think people has been a very unregulated or unstructured data sector. Like it's easy
Mhm.
to get data and structure it around very specific parts of business, like sales or marketing. There's very specific KPIs and like things you can analyze and pattern recognition. Both people, it's a lot more organic and difficult. And I think this is really interesting how it's able to
Right.
actually create a more unbiased approach. I'm also curious if you're considering expanding this into other non-technical
Well, absolutely.
hiring fields.
We're in IT right now, but we're going to expand into every area of expert knowledge. So, it's all the engineerings, electrical, mechanical, civil, biotech, healthcare, nursing, legal, construction, any industry that requires a professional licensing, all of it. Because
That's
our
so interesting.
architecture um, is is neutral. I mean, um, we just happen to start in IT because my background goes back, but our architecture is such that it can be applied to any. body of knowledge. But IT just happens to be the biggest slice of pie out there.
Is there any emerging recruiting tech you've seen that is doing anything similar, or how do you see the field right now looking?
Well, so on one hand, they've always said that like if you're the only person trying to solve one particular type of problem, that's problematic in itself. It's like, okay, is that big enough problem? Because if it was something that causing a lot of pain, there wouldn't be only one company doing it. So yeah, there are other companies who are able to conduct live interviews between a person and, not needing a person to interview a candidate. Yeah, there are certainly tools. There's plenty of avatar based products that that ask the candidate a question, but they're more suited for the high volume type positions like, call center recs for someone who's going to be working in retail or like, McDonald's or something like that, where or people who are like hiring CDL, like commercial driver's license people, right? Where asking a question like, do you have a driver's license? Are you available on weekends? Important questions that need an answer to someone who's, say, hiring someone who's got to be available for weekend shifts, right? But asking somebody if they're available on weekends is not quite the same as asking somebody, how would you design a microservice that can withstand unexpected spikes in network traffic and withstand significant database outages without having any downtime?
Yeah.
You know, in fact, I happened to do a demo for somebody who owns a website where there's hundreds of HR tech products that are sort of, on display, so to speak. And there's dozens of other tools that are in the assessment space alone. And when I was showing the product, he reminded me, well, there's plenty of products out there where you have um, a live candidate talking to technology in some fashion. Most of them are avatars, and, some kind of AI powered or a chatbot. Like Smart Recruiters has their new little chatbot called Winston, and Winston interacts with the candidate. So that's not a new thing. But again, the complexity of the conversation is where we separate ourselves from everybody. And the fact that this person, while on one hand saying, yeah, there's plenty of tools out there that can handle a person to technology interactive live conversation, but then confess like, yeah, but I haven't seen any of them that can handle complex conversations, the type of which you just showed me. When I heard that, I was like, hell yes, that was validation that had gravity with it. So we're super excited about the future and what we're about to drop on the world. We're shooting for Q1 of 26. AI automation, full at scale.
What's the like size of the impact that you hope to see or
Well,
plan for?
I shared with you those numbers. So those numbers are based on US for sourcing tools and for job posting. My research says that globally, companies spend $757 billion on recruiting across the board. But that's products, that's services, that's like RPOs, that's all in.
Yeah.
But more than $750 billion changes hands on companies addressing their need for recruiting something, and that's from individual products to services across the gamut. And we are going to send seismic shockwaves across the whole space.
That's awesome. Are you I guess because you've already developed the product so far along, it's not a big worry about other people following behind you and trying to
Well, there's
replicate.
always knockoffs, um, but I found that we've chosen a unique niche. Like all the applicant tracking vendors and all the sourcing tools out there that are meant to try to help find candidates, etc. They're all based on keywords.
Yeah.
Finding a keyword, making a match between a keyword on this document, which is a job description of this document, which is a resume. Do you know what the evolution of trying to find, like, take a body of information and identify a smaller subset of that so you don't have to look as hard to find what you're looking for? Do you know what the origin of that was?
I believe you told me it was the Dewey Decimal.
The Dewey Decimal System, introduced during the Ulysses S. Grant administration in 1876. Now, all these sourcing tools and all these ATSs and all these HR tech stuff, it's all this cutting edge, technology is still operating on business logic that was first defined in 1876. The premise of how you find a subset of a larger body of information is semantic based. It's keyword.
Yeah.
And we
So
could care less
garbage
about
in,
keywords.
garbage out. Yeah. I think it's interesting because that amount of manual labor you put into finding the right questions and understanding why they're important and how the answers reflect different levels of competency is what I'm assuming your system is trained on. And that's not something that's like easily replicable with like ChatGPT. Like, of course, it can come up with technical questions, but it's not going to be.
Oh yeah, I did my first technical interview in 1997. It was on active server pages, and holy crap, did I just date myself on that one. But I've been putting together like C++ and Java interviews, going back to the, like I said, the late 90s, and just been building my war chest of technical questions that have been proven in the field, and so we're really excited about the future and the impact we're going to have on how companies harvest talent. Because the other thing too is, if you look, there's a guy named Josh Burson who has done some landmark studies in the space on the impact, the economic impact of an empty seat. Like he did a study a long time ago that actually Indeed.com did this study that showed the U.S. economy burns $160 billion a year on the opportunity cost related to empty seats. Because like it's at a software company, there's an expectation of how much generation revenue impact that seat expects to produce. Certainly more than the salary and benefits they're paying them, right?
Mhm.
So an empty seat at a software company is like the unsold hotel room or the unsold plane ticket, right?
Yeah.
And so in Burson had done a study that showed that companies, an empty seat carries about $1,000 a day of opportunity cost impact. Well, one of the reasons IT positions are open so long is because there's a wildly inefficient process by which they identify and eventually hire somebody. Okay. Companies are going to be able to massively reduce the embedded opportunity cost that comes with unfilled seats because they're going to be able to identify the right talent on first contact. So a company whose average time to fill a seat is, say, 52 days, if they can get that down to, say, 20, they just shaved 8 figures of embedded opportunity cost that goes right back toward their bottom line because they're going to ship products sooner because they have the feet on the ground doing the work because it takes them less time to get people hired.
100%. Not to mention
So I'm
if
on
they're
fire for what we're about to
yeah,
drop in the industry.
not to mention if they're hiring, um, if they're frustrated with the candidates they have and they hire for someone who maybe they know they have to train because they couldn't find someone that's already fully meeting the requirements, that
Right.
training period itself, like that learning curve, the investment of higher level management to train the person is also in itself an opportunity cost. And like there's a period of time where there's actually probably an inefficiency in that person for the
Absolutely.
company.
And here's the thing: it's like you could turn your whole ecosystem into an L&D laboratory on steroids. If you want to start growing, let's say you have people on product side, but then you have, say, a professional services element, right? And you have people who don't have deep technical skills, but they got all the client facing polish you'd ever ask for. Well, come up with a combination of different positions with different competencies and just have them constantly interview, take the tests for certain positions to enhance their technical insight and knowledge and experience with certain areas. It's going to help raise their competency in a key area, leverage their soft skills, deepen their technical skills, all while staying in their own ecosystem. They didn't have to leave their desk. You didn't have to have a formal training department where they sit there in a classroom and get fed a bunch of boring content. This is going to change the game on L&D. internal mobility, as well as hiring on the front end. So I can't wait.
Okay, well, last question. From a more like entrepreneurial standpoint, you growing the business, what is like a lesson that you didn't expect to learn or can recall learning in growing the company that someone else out there could benefit from?
Yeah, just if you believe in something, you can't give up on your idea. You can't give up on your passion. And even when human nature confounds you at every angle, like to get a company to use our product, you'd think that it's obvious to a blind man why someone would want to screen the candidate more effectively, but you'd think it would be easy to convince somebody who makes money by placing somebody that doing a better job of screening somebody should be your objective. And there'd be some people say, well, this is good enough. Resume is good enough. So the thing I've learned is that you can't make assumptions on behalf of someone you're trying to sell to. They're not always going to look at the world the same way you do. But I just believe so deeply in what we're doing and the mission, the problem we're trying to solve, is that I'm just not willing to give up.
Yeah. I can
Yeah,
feel a
we're
passion and I can see how much
well,
uh
this stuff matters. This
you've
stuff matters. Ask somebody who
yeah.
was a publicly traded company who blew a shipping date on a product they'd been pushing, hyping for 6 months, and they miss a shipping date. Wow, that's not going to be a good day in the boardroom. I can tell you that.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much. It's really been a pleasure and I've learned a lot and it was really great.
All right.